showed up awfully late with a Starbucks in her hand, and they were just chatty. She was just a rude person. Hey guys, I want to talk about when the older, more experienced nurses get rude. I had one older nurse who was 29 and insisted that her generation was the last generation that really worked hard and took coming to work on time seriously. She was saying this to another coworker in front of me. She thought I was in my early 20s. Whoop, whoop. Hold on, I'm getting my McDonald's. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, and honestly, that nurse was just kind of rude. I listened to her talk several shifts. I worked clinicals in her same floor as her, alongside her, not as my preceptor, but just, you know, and she was just a rude person. And for saying that her generation was the last ones that really cared about work and like came on time and took their job seriously, she showed up awfully late with a Starbucks in her hand. So I took what she said with a grain of salt. And some people are rude just because they're rude people. But then yesterday there was a nurse, and she was actually the sister of a patient. And she was feeling chatty, and my preceptor was feeling chatty, and they were just chatty. And she said, she saw I was a student, you know, and she's like, so where are you at school at? And I said, I'm at Elmhurst in a long distance program. And she's like, oh, how does that work? I said, well, my classes are online and I do my clinicals closer to home. She just gave my preceptor a look like, and said something about,
boy, they've changed nursing school a lot since we went.
And my preceptor is the same age as me, so I assume she went about 20 years ago. But this lady was probably in her 60s, so she probably went about 40 years ago. And then she proceeded to tell me how she had to live on campus and boys weren't allowed in their dorms. They had to wait outside at the door, and they were at the hospital all day long, 3 days a week, and she just went on, and then she's like,
do you know blah 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 about how the heart works?
And honestly, my preceptor didn't know the answer to this question either, in my defense. But she looked at me and she's like,
yeah, they probably don't teach you that anymore.
She was talking about potassium, and I said,
well, I know potassium and sugar bind to each other, and so like if someone's potassium's high, we give them glucose and insulin because the potassium binds to the sugar, and then the insulin helps push that into the cell. So, you know, I assume that's what you need to do if someone's potassium's high.
And she looked at me like,
oh, I don't know about that. I don't know about the cellular level, but the potassium affects the heart in blah 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 way.
Which I knew was bad for your heart, but I didn't know exactly how it affected the heart. But she admitted right there, I learned something from nursing school they didn't teach her. But all that said, this was a really nice lady, and I don't think she was, I mean, it was rude what the way she, you know, pretended my nursing school was very, very subpar. But I don't think her goal was to criticize me or more my education as much as it was that she wanted validation and just admiration for what her schooling was, because it was so different than what our schooling is. And, you know, it's human nature to think the way she was thinking, but I just overall, I mean, I'm sharing the rudest part of the whole conversation with you to say that overall, I don't think she was a mean nurse. I don't think she was the kind of person who was going to be out to eat her young like the first 29-year-old was. I think that if she was a nurse on that floor and I was a student nurse, I might have got a little tired of the
back in the day
comments, but she's the kind of nurse that wanted to educate and help me, and I think would have been encouraging overall. So, you know, when someone comes to you as a baby nurse and treats you like a baby nurse and maybe takes a jab at your post-COVID education, take the jab with a grain of salt. And if overall they're trying to help you learn, and they're ready to answer any questions, and they're smiling at you and saying, good to see you today, don't let their jabs get to you. Just validate their own learning experience. And, you know, that's a nurse that's a comrade. No, if you have a nurse like the 29-year-old that she was just downright rude and grumpy all the time, and grumpy with patients and grumpy with me, stay away from them, because I think they're gonna blame you if they can for mistakes if you're working on the same team as them, and they're just grumpy people in general. So I don't know, that's my thoughts on if a more experienced nurse picks on you. Take the picking on with a grain of salt and look at how they treat you overall otherwise. If they're just picking on your schooling, it is a very different schooling than what they had. And, you know, I don't know completely whose is better. On one hand, I think they probably got better instruction and more hands-on experience and more practice than what I got or I'm getting in school. On the other hand, they didn't have access to YouTube, and you guys know I'm a big fan of how much stuff I can watch people do step by step over and over again, and lectures I can listen to over and over again. And I will say every nurse I feel like I've watched make different shortcuts. Some nurses do not wear gloves as often as they should. Some nurses do not do nearly as complete of an assessment as they should when they're going to see patients. Just various things. Everyone takes different shortcuts, and that's just the reality. I'm not sure you can take no shortcuts and handle a normal hospital patient load. But that said, when I watch things on YouTube on here's how to do an IV insert, here's how to do whatever, here's what you do if someone's potassium is too high, I'm watching something that thousands of people are watching, sometimes tens of thousands. It's a popular nurse channel, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people are watching. And you better believe if you look at the comments, if they made a mistake, there are people on top of them saying it. Whereas when I'm with my preceptor, if they're doing something wrong, if they're making a mistake, there's no one to say, now watch, she didn't put gloves on there, and she should have put gloves on there, or she made that a clean technique and that should have been a sterile technique. So we have that advantage. If you're watching things on YouTube with 1 million people watching them and commenting, I think that's an advantage they didn't have 20, 40 years ago. That said, it's not my job to tell more experienced nurses about my advantages in schooling. It's not my job to do anything but be polite and encouraging when they talk about how great their school was, and make friends, because we need those experienced nurses to be our friends. So, rant over, but that is my thought about dealing with more experienced nurses when they take a jab at your schooling. Look at their personality overall, and before you decide if you should get totally offended or not. Because the older lady was a little rude, but I think she would have been a great nurse to work alongside of. And, you know, I think she wasn't thinking about completely the impact her words would have had on someone, maybe, when she was talking about, well, back in the day when I went to school, and the look she gave the other nurse when I said, you know, I was doing a long distance program. It wasn't meant personal. I could see how someone would take it personal. It definitely was rude, but it wasn't meant personal. And overall, like I said, she seemed like a good nurse that wanted to encourage and teach. So she's someone I would want on my side. That's all, guys. Tell me your experience with some more experienced nurses.